The sound of my crutches striking the courtroom floor was louder than the gavel that had just been used to call the session to order. The sharp click of rubber tips against polished wood echoed through the chamber like a drumbeat, and with each step I felt pain surge from my leg into my ribs. I did not flinch. Pain was nothing compared to what I wanted to achieve. I wanted her to see me walk. I wanted her to understand that the woman she had buried on paper was still breathing. The air was heavy, as if everyone sensed something unusual was about to unfold. I paused for a moment in the doorway, letting the light from the hallway stretch across the benches, across the polished tables, across the faces of strangers who were here to witness a hearing they thought was routine. I stood there in plain black clothes, my hair pulled back, no makeup, nothing glamorous, just the raw presence of someone who had endured. My crutches pressed into my palms, my shoulders squared. I stepped forward and the room shifted. The plaintiff's table came into focus. My sister Sophia Dawson sat there, 31 years old, flawless in appearance, a navy suit hugging her frame, gold earrings glinting under the lights. Her posture radiated control, her lips curled with the faint satisfaction of someone convinced she had already won. A stack of legal documents rested before her pages. She had prepared with precision pages that declared me gone. She adjusted a pen between her fingers as if truth was something she could casually sign away. Then her eyes rose. They locked on mine. In an instant, the color drained from her face. Her pen slipped. Her chest heaved as though air itself had been stolen from her. The silence that followed was broken by the most piercing scream I had ever heard. It was not a gasp. It was not surprise. It was the scream of a person watching a ghost walk into the room they thought they controlled. The sound cut through the chamber high and ragged, and people turned in shock. Jaws dropped. A juror covered his mouth with both hands. Another whispered a frantic prayer. Sophia stumbled backward, her chair screeching against the marble, her arms flailing as papers flew into the air. Contracts and affidavits she had clung to as weapons scattered across the floor like confetti at a parade gone wrong. The bailiff lunged to steady her, but she shook free, collapsing to her knees before scrambling back against the table. The judge slammed the gavel once, twice, 3 times, his voice rising, "Order, order in this court." But no one listened. All eyes were locked on me. I stood still, letting the moment breathe, letting the humiliation wrap itself around Sophia like chains. She had filed petitions that described me as incapacitated. She had presented a death certificate that bore my name. She had told the state, the bank, the lottery office, the court itself, that I no longer existed. And yet I stood here, alive, breathing, walking. Every second of silence was a hammer striking her carefully built empire of lies. I remembered the night of Twisted Steel when headlights swelled in my rearview mirror, when the roar of an engine overtook my senses, when metal slammed into my car and darkness consumed me. I had tasted blood. I had felt the crushing weight of airbags and the suffocating smell of smoke. I had thought my story ended there. And maybe Sophia had counted on it. But fate had carried me through. I survived. And survival had carried me into this chamber where she would face the truth she could not manipulate. My attorney, Mark Bennett, rose, his calm presence a counterpoint to the storm. He gestured toward me and said with deliberate clarity, "This is my client. She is alive." The room erupted. Murmurs filled the space. A man in the gallery muttered that he had read the obituary online. A woman whispered that she had believed the rumors about the car crash. Jurors exchanged bewildered looks, their pens frozen above their notepads. Even the stenographer paused her fingers hovering over the machine as if words themselves could not keep pace with reality. Sophia's lawyer stammered, his mouth opening and closing, eyes darting from me to his trembling client. Sophia clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white sweat beading on her forehead. Her lips quivered, forming words she could not release. I did not speak. I let my presence speak for me. I tightened my grip on the crutches and advanced further into the room. Each step was a declaration. I am here. I am not erased. I am not yours to control. I caught fragments of voices in the gallery. How could they have done this? She looks broken, but she is alive. Imagine thinking you killed your sister and then she walks in. The whispers grew louder until the judge demanded silence again. But even his authority could not fully contain the weight of the moment. My gaze stayed locked on Sophia. Memories surged. I saw her smirking in childhood as she blamed me for broken toys. I saw her whispering lies to our parents, crafting punishments for me. I saw her standing tall in the living room weeks ago, demanding I hand over the lottery winnings to a trust she would control. I heard her voice, promising I would not keep the money. And now I saw her undone, her carefully composed world collapsing in front of strangers and law. The satisfaction was not joy. It was not triumph. It was the steady relief of someone finally reclaiming the space stolen from them. The judge gestured me forward to the witness stand. My ribs ached, my leg throbbed, but I moved with steady determination. Each crutch striking the floor was a drumbeat of justice. My eyes burned, but my jaw was firm. Sophia's scream still rang in my ears, but it no longer hurt. It was proof that the truth had returned to haunt her, proof that her lies had found their reckoning. As I reached the front of the chamber, I felt the room hold its breath. This was no longer just a hearing. This was a revelation. The world she had built on forged ink and fraudulent seals was crumbling. And it was only the beginning. Long before the scream that echoed through the courtroom, long before forged papers and death certificates, the seeds of betrayal were planted in the house where I grew up. To understand why my sister could look at my life as something disposable, you would have to step into that house and breathe the air of control that lingered in every room. I was born into the Dawson family as the second daughter, the one who arrived after the golden child had already taken her throne. My father, Colonel Richard Dawson, had returned from his military career with medals that gleamed brighter than his patience, and my mother, Linda, hovered in the background as the dutiful wife who smoothed his uniform and his pride. They believed in hierarchy, they believed in control. And Sophia, 3 years older than me, became the vessel for all their expectations. From the moment she spoke her first word, every teacher, every neighbor, every relative was reminded of how brilliant she was. Her report cards were displayed on the fridge like sacred texts. Her trophies lined the hallway, polished weekly by my mother as if they were family relics. Her picture smiled down from every mantel, every album, every story my parents chose to tell about what it meant to be a Dawson. And then there was me. I was Rachel, the afterthought, the difficult one, the child who never quite fit the mold. I was told to adapt, to stay quiet, to let Sophia shine. My father would clap Sophia on the back for a perfect grade and then turn to me with narrowed eyes, reminding me to learn discipline. My mother would scold me for complaining, saying that I should be proud to live in my sister's shadow. When we were children, the differences appeared harmless, almost ordinary. Sophia would take my toys and announce that I had given them to her. If I cried, she would whisper lies that made me the culprit. Once, she tore pages from my favorite book, handed the fragments to my mother, and said I had destroyed it myself in a tantrum. Punishments always fell on me. My father's belt left stripes across my skin when I was 7 because Sophia swore I had broken her doll. My mother's hand struck my cheek when I shouted that it was not true. Even then, I learned that truth in our household was not a fact, but a privilege granted to the one they favored. As we grew older, her cruelty became sharper, more sophisticated. She no longer needed to steal toys. She stole confidence. At family gatherings, she would make jokes about my clumsiness, always loud enough for everyone to laugh. She hinted that I was irresponsible with money, even though I had been the one who saved lunch money for months to buy school supplies. She whispered to my high school boyfriend that I was unfaithful, a lie that ended the relationship overnight. I began to believe that my voice carried no weight, that my perspective was always suspect. My parents reinforced it without hesitation. When I came home proud of an art project, they dismissed it as a distraction from academics. When I considered applying to a university out of state, they reminded me that Sophia had chosen a more practical path and I should follow her lead. Even small decisions were stripped from me. What we ate for dinner depended on Sophia's preference. Where we went on vacation was chosen based on her mood. I was expected to bend so that she would not break. And break she never did because everyone around her reinforced her throne. By the time I reached my teens, silence had become my survival. I withdrew into myself, learned to speak less, to avoid provoking the icy punishment of Sophia's disapproval. If she did not speak to me for a week, it was treated as my fault. My father would say, "You must have upset her." My mother would murmur, "Just apologize so the peace returns." I carried guilt for storms I did not create. Yet a small ember of resistance burned. My body became a canvas of small rebellions. I cut my hair short when Sophia insisted long hair was prettier. I wore boots when she sneered at them. I wrote in journals late at night, pages filled with words no one else could erase. Those scraps of autonomy were fragile, but they were mine. And then came the military. At 18, desperate for escape, I enlisted. My father, the retired colonel, approved of the choice, but made it clear that in his eyes, I was still unworthy. He bragged about Sophia's university achievements while reducing my enlistment to an impulsive adventure. Yet for me, it was salvation. The structure of the military was harsh, but it was honest. Orders were orders, discipline was earned, and rank came from performance, not favoritism. In uniform, I found a sense of belonging that home had never offered. I learned endurance in desert heat. I learned courage under fire. I learned that my strength did not depend on Sophia's permission. But even away from home, the control lingered. Sophia called often, her voice dripping with faux concern, questioning my finances, criticizing the friends I made, hinting that my decisions embarrassed the family. My parents echoed her, urging me to trust her guidance, to listen, to comply. It was as if the leash of control stretched across continents. When my deployment ended and I returned stateside, I rented a small apartment and tried to carve a life of my own. I thought distance would protect me. But Sophia had a way of pulling strings, convincing my parents that I was unsafe, pressuring me to move closer to remain under their watchful eyes. My resistance grew weary. The battles of war felt easier than the battles of family. Still, I clung to fragments of independence. I kept my finances private. I limited contact. I bought small things that symbolized freedom, a coffee maker of my choice books that no one could tear, curtains that matched no one's taste but mine. They were minor victories, but they kept me breathing. Looking back, I see now that Sophia was never satisfied with influence alone. She craved control so complete that my very existence felt like a threat. The hierarchy of our family had been built with her at the pinnacle and me beneath her feet. Any attempt to rise even an inch was met with swift correction. That hierarchy became the silent law of our household, enforced with smiles in public and punishments in private. By the time I reached my late 20s, I had almost accepted that this was the rhythm of my life. I would always be the lesser sister, the shadow to her spotlight. What I did not know was that fate would soon place $6 million into my hands, and with it a chance to rewrite everything. What I also did not know was that Sophia would see that chance not as mine, but as hers, and that her lifelong need for dominance would drive her to cross lines no one should ever cross. After leaving the military, I thought I had left battles behind, but civilian life proved to be its own kind of endurance test. My days became a pattern of simplicity that some might call dull, but to me felt like relief. I rented a one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a building that smelled faintly of old paint and coffee grounds. The elevator worked only half the time, and the landlord barely remembered my name, but it was mine. I woke early, brewed a pot of coffee, and walked to the same small grocery where the cashier recognized me as the woman who never forgot her reusable bag. My job at an insurance office was steady but uninspiring. I answered phones, scheduled appointments, and filed paperwork until my back ached. The paycheck covered rent and groceries with just enough left for a modest savings account. It was a life of survival, not of luxury, but it gave me something I had not felt in years: space without Sophia hovering. Still, she found ways to insert herself. She called weekly under the guise of concern, asking about my bills, my friendships, my choices. When I resisted her questions, she relayed her worries to our parents, who then called with the same script. I told myself that if I stayed quiet, they would eventually lose interest. It was a fragile illusion. My only indulgence during those years was a habit I had started long ago, buying a lottery ticket every Saturday. It began as a joke when I was still in uniform. I would tuck the ticket into my wallet and imagine a different life during sleepless nights in the barracks. Most weeks, I forgot about it until I found the crumpled slip in my laundry. But it was mine, a ritual of possibility. One unremarkable Saturday, I stopped at the gas station near my building, bought milk bread and a ticket. I drove home cooked pasta, read a book, and almost forgot about it. The next day, as I refueled my car, I checked the numbers against the newsprint taped to the counter. At first, my eyes misread. I blinked once twice, then the realization hit me like a tidal wave. Every number aligned. $6 million. My knees trembled and I gripped the pump to steady myself. The world blurred as if the edges of reality could not contain the magnitude of what had just happened. I drove home in a daze, parked in the lot, and sat staring at the dashboard. For years, I had lived under the weight of control. Now I held a chance at freedom that no one could dictate. I pictured a house with sunlight streaming through wide windows, a garden, maybe even a dog. I pictured courses I could take, travels I could make without asking permission. For the first time in my life, the future felt like mine. I kept the secret close, savoring it like a treasure. I planned to meet with the lottery office, hire a financial advisor, and secure my winnings before anyone else could touch them. For 2 days, the secret lived only in me, a rare sweetness. But secrets have thin walls when Sophia is near. On the third evening, she appeared at my door unannounced. She claimed she was in the neighborhood visiting our parents, but her sharp eyes scanned my apartment with suspicion. She asked trivial questions, but her ears caught the tone of my voice. The excitement I could not fully mask after speaking with the lottery office. She left with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother family meeting tonight. Sophia says it is important. My stomach clenched. I knew. That evening they arrived as a unit. My father, Richard, sat stiff on the couch, his military bearing never softened even in retirement. My mother, Linda, perched beside him with the calm of someone resigned to follow his lead. Sophia entered with a leather-bound planner, her heels clicking like a metronome of authority. She wasted no time. "I hear congratulations are in order," she said smoothly. $6 million is a lot for one person to manage, especially someone without experience. My parents nodded as if they had rehearsed. "That is why we are here to help." She opened the planner, revealing charts and notes, a plan she had drafted as though my life were a corporate merger. The solution she proposed was a family trust with her as trustee. She promised protection stability-wise investments. My father added that money was dangerous without discipline. My mother murmured that unity was safety. I sat with my tea cooling untouched in front of me. At first, I responded calmly. I thanked them for their concern, but said I intended to hire a professional advisor. Sophia's smile tightened. She pressed harder. "You do not know what you are doing. You will waste it. You will regret it." I kept my voice even. Then I repeated with firmness. "No, I will manage it myself." The silence that followed was like the hush before a storm. Sophia's expression hardened, her eyes dark with something I had seen before, only in glimpses. It was the look she gave before she twisted truths against me. It was the look of someone preparing to strike. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into something cold. "This money will not stay in your hands for long." My parents did not protest. They glanced at each other, then at the floor. Their silence was complicit. Sophia closed her planner with a sharp snap, stood, and declared the meeting over. My father muttered something about reconsidering. My mother avoided my gaze. They left without good night or hug. I remained in the dim room with the shadows stretching across my walls. The truth settled heavy in my chest. Sophia did not see my win as luck or independence. She saw it as theft from the hierarchy she had ruled all her life. In her mind, I was still the lesser sister, the shadow, the one whose fortune should be redirected into her control. My refusal was not the end of the matter. It was a line I had crossed, a line she would not allow to stand. What I did not realize was that the countdown to disaster had already begun. When the papers were signed for the little 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, I thought perhaps the worst was behind me. It was not a mansion, not the kind of estate Sophia might have chosen to parade, but it was mine. The porch caught the afternoon sun, and the backyard had enough space for the garden I had always imagined. Standing in the empty living room with my name on the deed, I felt something I had never felt under my parents' roof: freedom. I placed the folder of documents on the passenger seat of my car and drove back toward my apartment with a quiet thrill humming through me. It was late, close to 9, and the road was hushed in that way. Weekday nights can be when even the traffic lights seem to blink lazily. A fine drizzle streaked the windshield, reflecting the orange glow of the street lamps. I remember thinking I should take the curves slowly. Then came the roar. It grew behind me, louder, unnatural in its speed. Headlights swelled in the rearview mirror, blinding me. Before I could process impact, the slam was bone rattling, a violent jolt that hurled me forward against the seatbelt. My head snapped back, then forward, smashing against the wheel. Metal screamed as the truck shoved my car across the slick asphalt. I gripped the steering wheel knuckles white, praying it would hold me steady. Another hit from the side sent the world tilting. Guardrail loomed in my peripheral vision, and then came the deafening crunch of steel folding into itself. Glass shattered. Airbags exploded in a white bloom that stole my breath. My ribs cracked under the force. Pain lanced through my leg. Smoke filled my nostrils. Gasoline clung to the back of my throat. I could taste iron, bitter and metallic. My body was pinned. Vision, narrowing, ears ringing with the horn that blared and blared until darkness swallowed the sound. When I woke, sterile light seared my eyes. A mask covered my face, feeding me oxygen that smelled faintly of plastic. Machines beeped. My body throbbed with pain so deep it felt fused to my bones. A nurse leaned into view, her expression tense. "You are in the hospital," she said softly. "You were in a bad accident. Stay still." My voice came out a dry whisper. "How long?" "2 days," she answered. My mind reeled. I asked about my family. She hesitated before replying. "We called the number listed for emergencies. No one came." I told myself she was mistaken. I told myself Sophia or my parents would walk in at any moment bearing Flowers' apologies concern. But hours passed. Days followed. The doorway remained empty. Doctors explained the extent of my injuries: multiple fractured ribs, a compound break in my left leg, requiring surgery, deep bruising, a concussion that would leave headaches and dizziness for weeks. "You were lucky to survive," the surgeon said, and part of me knew he was right. Yet lying tethered to tubes and braces, I did not feel lucky. Nights stretched endlessly, pain medication dulling but never erasing the ache. I replayed the accident in slow motion. The roar of the engine, the deliberate way the truck had hovered before striking, the persistence of the hits until my car was mangled against the rail. Each time I tried to speak, the thought aloud, the words caught. Maybe it was just reckless driving, I told myself. Maybe coincidence. Yet beneath the fog of medicine, suspicion rooted itself. One evening, a nurse mentioned casually that Sophia had come to the hospital but had not entered my room. Instead, she had gone to the administrative desk, demanding access to my medical file. She had spoken curtly, urgently, then left without checking on me. The words stung more than my wounds. Why would my sister care more about paperwork than my breathing body? Bills arrived even as I lay immobile. I reached for my debit card to pay one and was told the transaction was declined. Confusion turned to panic when the bank explained that my accounts had been frozen due to a legal inquiry. No one could tell me more. My fragile sense of independence crumbled. I began to rely entirely on hospital staff for food, for comfort, for the smallest tasks. Humiliation pressed as heavy as pain. Still, I waited. Surely my parents would appear once the shock wore off. Surely they would not abandon me. But the doorway stayed bare. One morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. 4 words only. "Hope you are resting." Cold. Impersonal. Not the language of love, but of dismissal. The silence grew heavier. A kind night nurse named Carla sat with me on her break and admitted she had seen Sophia at the nurses' station a few days earlier, not to ask about me, but again to request insurance forms and medical documents. Carla shook her head. "Most relatives want updates on the patient," she said. "Yours only wanted paperwork." I pressed the sheets of my bed in my fists, fighting tears. That was when the seed of certainty began to grow. This was no accident. This was orchestration. My sister's promise during that family meeting echoed in my ears. This money will not stay in your hands for long. Now I lay in a hospital bed, my leg braced, my ribs cracked, my bank accounts locked, my family absent. On paper, I was alive, but in every other way, they were treating me as though I had already vanished. And in the still hours before dawn, as machines beeped steadily around me, I realized that perhaps on paper, I soon would be. The first time I realized something was terribly wrong was when the nurse handed me a bill and I tried to pay it with my debit card. The screen flashed declined. I frowned, asked her to try again, but the same message appeared. My pulse quickened. I had never missed a payment in my life, never bounced a check, never allowed late fees. Financial responsibility had been one of my few shields against Sophia's endless criticisms. I called the bank, my voice trembling as I navigated the maze of menus until a representative finally answered. I explained the decline and waited for reassurance. Instead, she told me my accounts were frozen due to a legal inquiry. She would not provide details. My throat tightened. I asked if there was a mistake. She repeated politely that until the inquiry was resolved, no funds could be accessed. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. I hung up and stared at the white hospital wall, my body pinned by pain and bureaucracy alike. When the nurse returned, I lied and said I would sort it out soon. Inside, I felt panic churn. Later that afternoon, a familiar figure appeared at the door. Mark Bennett, the lawyer I had hired months earlier to review the purchase of my house, walked in carrying a leather briefcase. His calm brown eyes met mine, and I saw something in them that scared me. He closed the door behind him, set the case on the tray table, and pulled a chair close. I asked if he was here about the accident. He shook his head. His voice was low. "I need you to prepare yourself." He opened the briefcase and slid out a folder. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The first document inside made my breath catch. It was a certified death certificate bearing my name, my date of birth, my social security number, cause of death injuries sustained in a motor vehicle collision. The date of death matched the night of the crash. My vision blurred. I whispered that it had to be a mistake. Mark shook his head. "This was submitted to the lottery office," he explained, "along with an affidavit claiming your sister Sophia is your next of kin and rightful heir." My body went cold. I turned the page with shaking fingers. The next document was a petition filed in county court requesting that Sophia be granted guardianship over me on the grounds that I was incapacitated. The language described me as cognitively impaired, unable to manage finances, unfit to make decisions. My name appeared again and again, framed as a liability to be contained. My heart pounded against my fractured ribs. Another page showed a quitclaim deed transferring the title of my new house into Sophia's name. The notary stamp looked official, but slightly off a detail Mark pointed out. The only reason it had not been processed was because the seal did not match records. My hand pressed to my forehead, the throbbing of my concussion mixing with disbelief. They were erasing me, not just ignoring me, not just abandoning me. They were systematically removing my existence from paper until nothing remained. I asked Mark how this was possible. He explained that forged documents circulate more easily than people realize, especially when supported by someone who looks credible, someone who plays the role of the grieving sister. The bank had frozen my accounts because they received the same death certificate. The lottery office had suspended my claim pending verification. The house transfer had almost gone through. My voice cracked as I whispered that I was alive, sitting right here. How could they believe otherwise? Mark's eyes softened. "You and I know that. But on paper, you are gone. Unless we act, the paper will speak louder than you." I stared at the documents until the words blurred. My chest heaved with sobs that tore through the stitches in my leg. I wanted to deny it, to call it paranoia, but the evidence lay before me in ink and seal. My sister had taken the family hierarchy to its final conclusion. If I could not be controlled, then I could be eliminated. Not in the physical sense alone, though the crash had nearly succeeded, but in the bureaucratic sense that leaves a person powerless. On paper, I no longer existed. In the silent hours of that night, the despair was overwhelming. Machines beeped, the hallway lights flickered, tears pooled on my pillow. I remembered childhood punishments, the sting of my father's belt, my mother's indifference, Sophia's smirk. I remembered the family meeting, her voice dripping with certainty as she promised I would not keep the money. I realized it had never been about fortune. It was about control. She could not stand that I had something beyond her reach, and so she decided to erase me. The thought hollowed me out. Yet even in despair, a flicker of rage lit within me. I had survived battlefields. I had endured nights under mortar fire. I had fought to breathe when smoke filled my lungs in Afghanistan. And now my own family thought a forged document could bury me. The humiliation cut deep, but beneath it burned something steady. I would not let Sophia's lies define my end. Not after everything. Still, the weight of betrayal pressed heavy. Mark advised caution. Forged documents were serious, but proving intent would require evidence. "We need more," he said. "A private investigator, more records, witnesses. We cannot rush this. If she senses you are fighting back, she will double down." I nodded, though my chest screamed for action. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You are not alone in this anymore." His words offered a lifeline. After he left, I lay staring at the ceiling. The documents rested on the tray table like a coffin for the life I had built. I touched the death certificate again, traced the letters of my own name as though reminding myself of my reality. Alive. 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 I whispered the word until sleep finally came fitful and restless. In my dreams, I walked into my parents' house demanding answers, but found only silence. I woke to the ache of my ribs and the sterile smell of antiseptic, more aware than ever that I had crossed into a new battle. I was no longer simply recovering from an accident. I was fighting to reclaim existence itself, and the war would not be waged quietly. The night after Mark left, I lay awake staring at the ceiling tiles until dawn. The documents he had shown me felt like shackles pressing against my chest, but beneath the fear, something older stirred. I remembered a phrase drilled into me during training Adapt and Overcome. It echoed through my mind with the steady rhythm of a march. I had been broken before on battlefields far from home, but I had learned that survival was not passive. Survival was action. If Sophia wanted to erase me on paper, then I would fight in ink and evidence. I would not be her victim. The first step was finding allies. Mark had already proven himself steady. When he returned the next day, he outlined what needed to happen. A private investigator could follow Sophia document, her movements dig into her finances. We would need hard evidence of intent, not just suspicion. I agreed, though, impatience gnawed at me. I wanted to see Sophia in handcuffs that very second, but discipline told me patience was its own weapon. Mark promised to arrange it discreetly. After he left, a nurse entered to check my vitals. Carla Jenkins had been assigned to my floor for weeks. A woman in her 40s with a quick wit and a blunt honesty that reminded me of comrades I had trusted overseas. She pulled the curtain closed and sat on the edge of the chair beside my bed. She told me in hushed tones that she had seen Sophia speaking late at night in the parking lot with a man leaning against a black pickup, a truck with fresh dents that looked too much like the one that had shoved me off the road. Carla's eyes were steady as she described the scene. She said it did not sit right with her that most sisters visited rooms, not parking lots. My pulse quickened, a potential link. I thanked her, squeezing her hand. She looked at me with something close to maternal concern and said, "You need to stay strong. She cannot win if you do not let her." Her words steadied me. The second ally came in the form of Sergeant Maria Lopez, a friend from my deployment who had settled a few towns over. Maria was the kind of woman who could fix a radio with duct tape and still have time to crack a joke. I had not spoken to her much since leaving the service, but desperation broke silence. I called her, my voice hoarse as I explained the situation. Without hesitation, she drove to the hospital and sat at my bedside. She listened, her eyes narrowing with each detail. When I told her about the forged documents, her jaw clenched. Then she leaned closer and whispered, "You know I can get into systems. If you need records, security footage, Anything I can help." Relief flooded me. I told her about the hospital cameras, about my suspicion that Sophia had come and gone without visiting me. Maria smiled grimly. "Consider it handled." Within days, she returned with stills pulled from hospital feeds, images of Sophia at the front desk asking for files, her posture impatient, her expression cold. Proof that she had been there but had deliberately avoided me. I stared at the photos, anger and vindication coiling together. The third ally arrived unexpectedly. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcy, an old friend Sophia had never completely managed to drive away. Marcy wrote that she had overheard Sophia bragging at a cafe about a windfall coming her way. When pressed, Sophia had joked that I was out of the picture and she was handling important family finances. My stomach turned reading those words. Out of the picture. Cold. Dismissive. It confirmed what I had begun to believe. She had not simply abandoned me. She had planned this. I sent the message to Mark. His reply was quick. "Every detail helps. Collect it all." For the first time since the crash, I felt momentum shifting. I was not alone. Pieces were falling into place. That night, I stared at the death certificate again, but instead of despair, I felt resolve. If Sophia wanted to bury me with paper, then I would resurrect myself with evidence. The plan began simply. We would lure her into revealing herself. Maria set up a small camera hidden in a clock by my hospital bed. Carla agreed to play her part, ensuring the device remained unnoticed. Marcy would send a message to Sophia hinting that I was awake and remembering everything. It was a risk, but I knew my sister's pride. She would not ignore the chance to gauge my condition to test if her lies were holding. I wrote in my journal like I had in the barracks years ago, each word sharpening my focus. I reminded myself of nights when shells rained down and we still managed to fight back. This was a new kind of war, but the principle was the same: patience, observation, and a strike at the right moment. In quiet hours, I imagined the look on her face when she realized the trap had closed. For the first time since the accident, I felt control returning to my hands. The pain in my ribs remained, the brace around my leg still pinched, but inside me something had shifted. I was no longer drifting through betrayal. I was preparing. I was a soldier again, only the battlefield was marble floors and legal documents instead of sand and gunfire. And this time the enemy was not a stranger across an ocean. It was blood. It was family. It was Sophia. But I would not let her win. The bait was set. Maria had hidden the small camera inside a clock on my bedside table, its lens barely visible to anyone who did not know it was there. Carla had checked it twice, ensuring the red indicator light was covered. Marcy had done her part too, sending Sophia a carefully worded message that I was awake, remembering details, and might soon speak to the authorities. We all knew Sophia well enough to predict her reaction. She would come. She would not be able to resist the chance to measure my strength or to intimidate me into silence. For 2 days, I waited each hour, stretching like a taut wire, every creak of footsteps in the hall making my pulse race. Then, on the third afternoon, I heard the unmistakable sound of heels clicking against tile. My stomach tightened. The door opened slowly, and there she was, framed by the fluorescent light, carrying a bouquet of flowers she never looked at again after placing them perfunctorily on the table. Sophia's smile was practiced smooth, the kind she had used all her life to charm teachers and deceive parents. "You look better than I expected," she said, her eyes scanning the monitors beside my bed, calculating my limitations. I forced my lips into a polite curve and thanked her coolly. Inside my chest, anger burned, but I kept my voice steady. I asked why she had not visited before. She tilted her head, feigning hurt. "I have been busy handling your affairs," she said, her tone suggesting I should be grateful. Affairs. The word sliced like a blade. I leaned back against the pillow, pretending fatigue. I told her I had heard she had been in touch with the lottery office and the bank. Her expression tightened for a fraction of a second before she smoothed it again. "Someone has been filling your head with nonsense," she said lightly. "You need rest, not rumors." I met her gaze, unwavering. "Do those rumors include a death certificate with my name on it?" That broke her mask for a heartbeat. Her lips parted, her eyes narrowed, but then she recovered with a condescending smile. "You always did have an overactive imagination, Rachel." I let the silence stretch the steady beeping of the heart monitor filling the space. Then I said quietly, "Funny, because my attorney has copies of the documents." This time, the flicker of panic was real. She shifted her weight fingers, twitching at the strap of her purse. Her voice dropped into something harder. "You are making a mistake. This could be handled quietly." I shook my head, forcing my voice calm, though every muscle in me ached to scream. "The time for quiet is over." She leaned closer, lowering her voice to what she must have thought was an unrecorded whisper. "You were supposed to stay gone. All you are doing now is making it worse for yourself." The words dripped with acid, but they were exactly what I needed. Every syllable was caught by the hidden camera, clear and sharp. I held her gaze, refusing to flinch, and let her see in my eyes that I was not afraid anymore. She straightened clearly, unsettled by my composure. Without another word, she turned her heels, striking the floor sharply as she left Bouquet, still untouched on the table, its bright petals absurd against the sterile room. The door clicked shut. For a long moment, I lay perfectly still, listening to the echo of her voice in my head. "You were supposed to stay gone." Then I turned to Carla, who had been hovering just outside. She slipped in, checked the device, and gave me a firm nod. The recording was clear. I exhaled a shaky release of tension I had been holding for weeks. That night, I sent the video file to Mark. His reply came almost instantly. "This is enough to bring her in, but let us give her a bit more rope." My stomach twisted at the thought of enduring another encounter, but I understood the strategy. The more she revealed, the stronger the case. And Sophia's arrogance had always been her flaw. She could not resist asserting control. I lay awake, the room bathed in dim light, thinking about how the balance had shifted. For the first time, I was not reacting blindly to her schemes. I was ahead. I had proof. I had allies. Still beneath the resolve lingered the ache of betrayal. I remembered nights as children when we had shared a room, her whispering cruel stories until I cried, then smirking when our parents blamed me for being sensitive. I remembered teenage years when she spread rumors to isolate me. Now those patterns had reached their ugliest form. It was not just about cruelty anymore. It was about annihilation. Yet even as those memories pressed heavy, I felt a new kind of strength rising. I thought of the battlefield again, of nights when survival depended on patience and preparation. I thought of my unit, of Maria's steady courage, of the comrades we had lost. They had not fought so that I could give up now. I whispered to myself the same words I had repeated under fire: "Hold the line." The next morning, the bouquet still sat untouched on the table, its petals beginning to wilt. I stared at it and felt nothing but clarity. My sister had crossed every line. She believed she could write me out of existence with ink and lies. She believed I would remain the obedient shadow I had always been. But now the tide had turned. The recording in Mark's hands was more than evidence. It was a declaration. Sophia's empire of manipulation had begun to crack, and soon the world would watch it collapse. The recording gave us leverage, but Mark was right, we needed more. Sophia was cunning, and a single confrontation in a hospital room, while damning, might not close the case. Her lawyer would argue context-twist words and present me as paranoid. We needed a chain of evidence so strong it could not be broken. That was when Mark introduced me to Carla Morris, a private investigator with a reputation for persistence. She was sharp-eyed, mid-50s, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen more lies than truth. She began trailing Sophia's movements, tracking her meetings, her bank withdrawals, her phone records through legal channels. Within days, she found the first thread. Sophia had made a cash withdrawal of $10,000 just days before my accident. The money had gone to a man named Thomas Kerr, manager at a local freight company. The company owned several trucks, including a black pickup with front-end damage matching what Carla Jenkins, the nurse, had described. The detail made my blood run cold. It meant the accident was not just suspicion, it was arrangement. Carla Morris presented photos of Sophia meeting Thomas in parking lots, their posture tense, their conversations hurried. One shot showed her handing him an envelope. Another showed Thomas standing beside the very truck witnesses remembered. The evidence was not yet a smoking gun, but it was enough to tie threads together. Mark reviewed it carefully, nodding as he explained the strategy. We would build the case piece by piece until it formed an undeniable picture. While Carla dug deeper, Maria focused on securing every digital trace we could find. She retrieved emails Sophia had sent from a private account messages to contacts who specialized in legal shortcuts and forged documentation. Some of the language was vague, coded with phrases like securing paperwork or handling guardianship quickly, but combined with the forged documents already in Mark's possession, the intent became clearer. Maria also managed to capture footage from hospital security cameras showing Sophia entering late at night, speaking with staff requesting records, and leaving without ever stepping into my room. Each frame added weight to the narrative. This was not a concerned sister. This was a woman orchestrating a disappearance. I watched all of it from my hospital bed, the brace on my leg, heavy, my ribs aching with every breath. Yet even as pain throbbed through my body, determination grew. I practiced standing longer each day, gripping the crutches until my palms blistered, forcing my muscles to remember their strength. Nurses shook their heads at my stubbornness, but I knew I had to walk into that courtroom under my own power. I wrote in my journal each night, reminding myself why I was fighting. Not for money alone, though $6 million was significant. I was fighting for identity, for the right to exist beyond my sister's control. I was fighting to prove that the shadow child had a voice, a body, a will that could not be erased. Fear lingered too. Some nights I woke sweating, hearing the phantom roar of the truck behind me, tasting blood again, feeling the snap of bones. I wondered if Sophia might try again, if another accident waited for me. But each time fear rose, I countered it with memory of the battlefield. Fear is natural, I whispered to myself, but fear is not command. I am command. Mark visited frequently, laying out the plan for court. He spoke with the calm precision of someone who had fought many battles in suits instead of uniforms. We would present the evidence in layers, starting with the forged documents, then the bank withdrawals, then the investigator's photographs, and finally the recording from my hospital room. By the time the jury heard Sophia whisper, "You were supposed to stay gone," they would already see her pattern of deceit. He emphasized that my testimony would be crucial. They needed to hear my story in my own voice, not as a victim lost in emotion, but as a soldier who had endured and survived. His words struck deep. I had spent so long shrinking myself in Sophia's shadow that speaking plainly about my life felt revolutionary. I began rehearsing, recounting my childhood, the favoritism, the punishments, the years of silence. Each time I told it aloud, I felt lighter, as though the truth itself was a form of armor. Carla Jenkins, the nurse, agreed to testify about Sophia's suspicious requests for medical records. Marcy would testify about Sophia's bragging in the cafe. Every piece, every person became part of a unit, not unlike the squads I had served with overseas. We each had our role, our line to hold. One evening, Maria found me practicing with my crutches and shook her head. She disappeared for an hour and returned with a cane, sleek and sturdy. "Try this," she said. "It will hurt less and make you look stronger." I gripped the handle, tested my weight on it, and felt a surge of confidence. I smiled at her. "You always knew how to improvise." She grinned. "Old habits die hard." Slowly, painfully, I transitioned from the brace and crutches to the cane. Each step was deliberate but steady. I imagined the moment I would walk into court cane, tapping against marble Sophia's face, draining of color as she realized her ghost was standing before her. That image carried me through the pain. As the day approached, Mark refined our order of presentation. Carla Morris finalized her report. Maria double-checked the video quality. I pressed my dress shirts, determined to appear composed. In my journal, I wrote one last line before the trial: "I have fought in deserts, and I have fought in shadows. Tomorrow I fight in light." The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cold, as if the sky itself understood the weight of what was about to unfold. I stood outside the courthouse with my cane in one hand, the air sharp against my skin, my ribs bound beneath the black dress I had chosen. The dress was simple but deliberate, a soldier's choice of armor in civilian form. Maria squeezed my shoulder before stepping back, her eyes steady with confidence. Mark stood beside me, briefcase in hand, his expression calm but fierce. Inside the courtroom hummed with whispers as people settled into benches expecting another ordinary proceeding. They had no idea. The bailiff called for order, the judge entered, and Sophia sat already at the plaintiff's table. She wore an immaculate cream suit, her hair perfectly styled, her posture that of a woman convinced she owned the room. Her lawyer shuffled papers, lips moving, as he rehearsed his opening statement. For a moment, Sophia looked composed until her gaze lifted and found me walking down the aisle. My cane tapped against the floor, each strike echoing in the chamber like a drumbeat. Conversation died. Heads turned. Jurors froze mid-movement. Sophia's face drained of color as if blood itself fled her. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Then came the sound high and raw, the same scream that had once filled this room. She staggered backward, her chair screeching, papers spilling to the ground in chaotic flutters. A juror gasped aloud, another pressed a hand to her chest. The judge slammed his gavel, demanding order, but the silence that followed was thicker than any command. I held my head high, the cane steady, my gaze locked on my sister. I wanted her to see me alive, whole, undeniable. I reached our table and sat slowly, my body aching but my spirit iron. Mark rose, his voice clear. "Your Honor, this is my client, Captain Rachel Dawson. She is alive despite the documents submitted to this court declaring otherwise." The words struck the room like thunder. Sophia's lawyer stammered, objecting without basis, but the judge waved him down. "Proceed," the judge ordered. Mark began with precision. He laid out the forged death certificate on the screen for the jury to see. "My name, my date of birth, the false date of death." Murmurs rippled through the room. He followed with the guardianship petition, its cold language describing me as incapacitated, unfit, a liability. He explained how it had been filed by Sophia within days of my accident. Next came the attempted transfer of my home, the mismatched notary seal, the evidence of intent. Jurors scribbled furiously, their faces tightening with unease. Sophia shifted in her seat, her knuckles white around the table edge. Her lawyer objected again, claiming clerical error, misunderstanding, but Mark pressed forward. The screen lit with still images from hospital security footage showing Sophia entering at odd hours, speaking to staff, never stepping into my room. Then came the bank records, the $10,000 withdrawal days before my accident. Carla Morris, the investigator, took the stand and described her surveillance. Sophia's meetings with Thomas Kerr, the envelope exchanged the black truck with fresh dents. She explained Thomas's role at the freight company and the suspicious crash that killed the driver shortly after my accident. Her voice was calm, deliberate, every fact a nail driven into the coffin of Sophia's lies. The jury leaned forward, captivated. Sophia's lawyer tried to shake her, but she never faltered. Mark then called Marcy, who testified about Sophia's bragging at the cafe. Her words about me being out of the picture, her smug tone when claiming she was handling family finances. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Then it was time for the recording. Maria set up the projector. The hidden camera video from my hospital room filled the screen. Sophia entered with flowers, her false smile plastered in place. Her words played clearly. "You look better than I expected." My questions followed. The moment about the death certificate, her dismissive reply, and then the sentence that sealed her fate. "You were supposed to stay gone." The room erupted in gasps. Sophia's lawyer leapt up shouting about context, but the judge silenced him with a glare. The video played on every condescending smile, every calculated tone captured for the jury to see. When it ended, the silence was heavy with truth. Finally, it was my turn. I rose carefully, cane, steady ribs aching, but voice clear. I told the jury about my childhood, about the hierarchy of our family, about living in my sister's shadow. I spoke of the night of the accident, the roar of the engine, the deliberate impact that left me broken. I described the weeks in the hospital, the empty doorway where no family ever appeared, the shock of discovering documents declaring me dead while I still fought for breath. My throat tightened once, but I forced myself steady. I wanted them to see not just a victim, but a survivor. I ended with a single line. My sister tried to erase me, but I stand here because truth does not die on paper. The jury sat transfixed. Sophia's lawyer attempted to cross-examine painting me as paranoid, but the evidence was too strong, the sequence too precise. He stumbled over objections, his arguments crumbling under the weight of proof. Mark delivered his closing with the gravity of a verdict already written. He spoke of betrayal, of calculated fraud, of conspiracy that went beyond greed into cruelty. He reminded the jury that justice was not just about money, but about truth. Then silence. The judge leaned forward, his expression grave. He spoke slowly, every word heavy. This court finds Sophia Dawson guilty of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy with a criminal investigation into the circumstances of her sister's accident to follow. Gasps filled the room. The bailiff stepped toward Sophia. She looked at me one last time, her eyes wide with something I had never seen in her before. Fear. Real, unmasked fear. She rose shakily, hands trembling as the cuffs clicked shut. For once, she had no words. She was led away, her world collapsing in front of everyone she had ever tried to impress. I sat back, exhaling a breath that seemed to release years of silence. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the weight of justice hanging heavy in the air. My body ached, my legs stiff, but my spirit stood taller than ever. The battle was over, and I had won. The courthouse emptied slowly after the verdict, the echo of Sophia's scream still lingering in the air, like a ghost refusing to leave. Reporters lingered outside, but I avoided their microphones, letting Mark handle the questions. I stepped into the chill of the afternoon with Maria at my side, the cane steady beneath my hand. For the first time in months, the air tasted clean. Sophia was in custody, her empire of lies dismantled piece by piece, yet as the adrenaline faded, a quiet heaviness settled. Winning did not erase the pain of betrayal. It did not rewind the years of silence or the childhood bruises. It did not return the nights I spent alone in a hospital bed staring at the doorway that never filled. But it gave me something more valuable than triumph. It gave me freedom. Within days, the news spread. Sophia Dawson, once praised as the perfect daughter, was now charged with fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The investigation into the crash expanded, connecting Thomas Kerr to her through financial records and witness statements. The driver who had rammed my car was already dead, but the conspiracy around him was unraveling. Sophia faced years in prison. For the first time in her life, consequences had come calling. My parents did not call me. Instead, I saw their names in articles neighbors quoted about the shame of Richard and Linda Dawson, the retired colonel and his dutiful wife, now marked as parents who had turned a blind eye to cruelty. Richard avoided the community center he once frequented, and Linda retreated into silence. Their world of polished appearances crumbled with Sophia's downfall. I felt no joy in their disgrace, only clarity. They had chosen silence over me, loyalty to hierarchy over love, and silence was its own sentence. Meanwhile, the practical battles continued. The lottery office restored my claim, issuing the check in my name. My accounts were unfrozen. The deed to my home was officially secured. I hired a financial advisor not tied to family. Someone who spoke with caution and respect, someone who listened. We invested carefully, avoiding extravagance. I had no interest in becoming what Sophia had accused me of, reckless and foolish. I wanted stability, security, and the ability to help others. I moved into my house, the small two-bedroom with the porch that caught the sun. My legs still ached as I climbed the steps, but when I turned the key and pushed open the door, the light pouring across the empty floor felt like a benediction. For weeks, I lived quietly arranging furniture, painting walls, filling the space with pieces chosen only by me. Each nail hammered, each book placed on a shelf felt like an act of reclamation. I was building a life free of Sophia's dictates. At night, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees and listened to the wind in the trees. It was peace I had never known. Healing came in layers. Physically, I attended therapy, relearning balance, strengthening muscles, breathing through pain. Emotionally, I allowed myself to reconnect. I called Marcy and thanked her for standing by me. We met for coffee, awkward at first, then easier laughter bubbling between sips. I reached out to others Sophia had pushed away from me, rebuilding friendships that had been fractured. Trust did not come instantly, but slowly the circle widened. Maria remained my anchor, reminding me with every grin that resilience was not just survival, but also joy. Carla Jenkins visited once bringing cookies and refusing to accept payment for her testimony. She said simply, "I could not let her win." Carla Morris, the investigator, closed her file with a satisfied smile, telling me she had seen plenty of betrayals, but rarely a survivor as determined as me. Each ally reinforced the truth I was no longer alone. With part of the money, I established a foundation for veterans and survivors of family abuse, a cause that felt personal. Writing that first check filled me with a sense of purpose deeper than any dollar figure. I knew what it meant to feel erased, to feel powerless. I wanted others to know they were not alone, that justice could be pursued, that freedom was possible. Newspapers picked up the story, painting me as a woman who had survived both war abroad and war at home. I read the articles cautiously wary of becoming a symbol, but I understood the importance of voices like mine being heard. If even one person found strength in my survival, then the pain had not been wasted. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat with tea on my porch and reflected. The path behind me was littered with scars, the crash, the forged documents, the betrayal of blood. But the path ahead stretched open, lined with possibility. I realized survival was not just about breathing after disaster. It was about reclaiming life on your own terms. It was about refusing to let those who tried to erase you dictate what came after. I no longer felt guilty for cutting ties with my parents. Their silence had spoken louder than any words. I no longer carried the weight of Sophia's shadow. She was where she belonged, accountable at last. I breathed deeply, the cool air filling my lungs, and whispered to myself, "I am here. I am alive. I am free." And as I stared at the fading light, I thought of others who might feel trapped under family control or silenced by betrayal. I wanted them to know what I had learned through fire and steel. Family can be a source of love, but when it becomes a weapon of control, stepping away is not betrayal. It is survival. To anyone who has been underestimated, manipulated, or nearly erased, hear this. Your voice matters, your story matters, and your existence is yours to guard. There is no greater justice than surviving and living well in the aftermath of someone else's attempt to destroy you. As I sit here tonight, the porch light casting a soft glow across the wooden steps, I find myself thinking not just about my story, but about yours. I know there are people out there listening who have lived through their own kind of battlefield. Maybe not with trucks and forged papers, maybe not with judges and gavels, but with words that cut silences that suffocate and betrayals that leave scars no one else can see. Some of you may have grown up in families where loyalty was demanded but never returned, where one child was raised high while another was kept low, where silence was the only shield you had. Some of you may have built lives only to watch people you trusted try to take them from you, whether through manipulation, lies, or sheer control. If any of that sounds familiar, then you already know what I mean when I say that survival is not just about living through pain. Survival is about refusing to let the ones who tried to erase you decide what your future will be. That is why I tell this story. Not for pity, not for spectacle, but because silence is what abusers and manipulators count on. Silence is their ally. Breaking that silence is the first act of resistance. I want you to think about your own life as you hear this. Has there been a moment when you felt smaller than you are because someone told you that was all you could be? Has there been a time when you stayed quiet because speaking would have upset? The order would have made someone else angry, would have cost you their approval. I know what that feels like, and I know the cost. But I also know the power that comes when you stand up, even if your legs shake, even if your ribs ache, even if the only weapon you carry is truth. Because truth, once spoken, cannot be buried forever. My sister thought she could kill truth with paperwork. She thought a forged death certificate could silence a heartbeat. She thought lies told loudly enough could drown out reality. She was wrong, and those who tried to silence you are wrong too. If you are watching this, I want you to take a deep breath and remember that your story matters. Your survival matters. You may not have $6 million at stake or a courtroom full of strangers, but you have something far more valuable: your own life, your own dignity, your own right to exist as you are. No one has the authority to take that from you, no matter how much they demand it. I want to ask you directly, Have you ever faced a family betrayal that left you questioning your worth? If so, I want you to share it. Not because I am curious about details, but because speaking it aloud, even in a comment, even in a sentence, is an act of power. You might be surprised how many others will nod, will say me too, will stand with you in solidarity. When I first told my truth, I thought I would stand alone. Instead, I found allies in unexpected places. A nurse who refused to be silent, a friend from the past who carried my secrets with care, a fellow soldier who reminded me that discipline is not just about fighting enemies overseas, it is about fighting the enemies inside your own home. And I found strength in myself, strength I had forgotten beneath years of being told I was less. Maybe your allies are out there too. Maybe they are waiting for you to take the first step to whisper your truth, to show them that you need them. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing your voice, you become someone else's ally as well. That is how survival becomes more than breathing. That is how it becomes healing. Now, I want to talk about forgiveness because I know someone listening is wondering. No, I did not forgive my sister. Forgiveness is not owed to someone who tries to erase you. What I did was release her from controlling my life any longer. That is not forgiveness. That is freedom. And you are allowed to choose freedom without apology. You are allowed to walk away from toxic parents, from manipulative siblings, from spouses who raise hands or voices against you. Walking away is not betrayal. It is the bravest form of loyalty you can offer, loyalty to yourself. I built a foundation for veterans and survivors, not because I had extra money to spare, but because I wanted proof written into the world that cycles can be broken. Every check I write, every program we support is my way of saying that what was meant to destroy me will instead build someone else's future. What was meant to silence me will instead amplify another voice. What was meant to bury me will instead plant seeds of hope. And I want you to ask yourself this: what can you build out of the rubble of what you endured? Maybe it is not a foundation. Maybe it is a friendship. Maybe it is a garden. Maybe it is simply the courage to smile again. Whatever it is, it matters. Because life after betrayal is not just about what you lost. It is about what you create. As I look into this camera, I want to remind you of something I wish someone had told me years ago. You are not invisible. You are not powerless. You are not defined by the lies someone else wrote about you. You are defined by the way you rise. So here is my invitation. Share your story in the comments. Tell me if you have ever been underestimated, erased, or controlled, and what you did to rise above it. If you are still in the middle of it, tell me that too. You might find answers here, support here, solidarity here. And if you do not want to write publicly, then take out a notebook tonight and write it for yourself. That is how it started for me in journals no one else read. The act of writing reminded me that I existed even when others wanted me silent. And I promise you, the moment you claim your story is the moment you begin to heal. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something inside, then I invite you to subscribe and stay with me as I continue to share these journeys. Not just mine, but stories of others who have faced betrayal and found justice, who have walked through darkness and found light. Together we can build a community where silence is broken, where truth is honored, where survival is celebrated. And I will leave you with this final thought. The world is full of people who will try to define you. Some will call you weak, some will call you unworthy. Some will try to write you out of your own life. But the only definition that matters is the one you claim for yourself. I was dead on paper, yet here I am, alive, breathing, and free. And so are you. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise.